Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have a really interesting one coming from a poll from Data for Progress, a Democratic-aligned pollster, which found that Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would lead Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer in a hypothetical 2028 New York Senate race matchup by 19 points. So the poll begins by Data for Progress saying that following Senator Chuck Schumer's decision to vote in favor of the Republican spending bill, some Democrats have begun questioning his leadership of the Democratic Senate caucus. Recent data for Data for Progress polling has found that Democratic voters nationwide want him to fight harder against President Donald Trump and the Republican agenda. Meanwhile, reporting indicates that fellow Democrats have encouraged Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to consider a primary challenge to Schumer in 2028. In a poll conducted between March 26th and March 31st, Data for Progress conducted a survey of 767 likely Democratic primary voters in New York using SMS and web panel respondents. The polling finds that Schumer is in a weak position to win a contested primary. He has the lowest favorability of all New York Democrats tested and loses a hypothetical 2028 matchup to Cortez by 19 points. The most popular Democratic figures tested in the poll included Senators Bernie Sanders at plus 69, former Vice President Kamala Harris plus 63, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts plus 60, and AOC plus 59. And the numbers are here as well. Bernie has a 57%, actually I'll just do the overall favorable, unfavorable, 83 favorable, unfavorable 14, and Harris 81-18 favorable, Warren 75-15 favorable, AOC 75-16, Buttigieg 70-15, Hakeem Jeffries 63-20, Gillibrand 64-24, Shapiro 49-11, with a lot of haven't heard enough to say for Shapiro, Warnock 48-10, Gretchen Whitmer 49-12, Hochul 65-29 positive or favorable, Newsom 51-23 favorable, Schumer 62-36 favorable, and Pritzker 29-9 favorable, Rahm Emanuel 32-20 favorable. New York Democratic primary voters consider threats to democracy to be the most important issue to their vote, followed by programs like Social Security and Medicare, then economy, jobs, and inflation. A staggering 84% of these voters also say that Democrats in Washington are not doing enough to stand up to Trump and the MAGA movement. In a hypothetical matchup for the 2028 Democratic primary for the U.S. Senate in New York, AOC leads Schumer by 19 points, 55% to 36%. Ocasio-Cortez leads with primary voters across racial and ethnic subgroups with a 16-point lead among black voters, a 15-point lead among white voters, and 28-point lead among Latino voters. Among voters under 45, she holds a 50-point lead, and she carries voters 45 and over by 8 points. AOC also leads with voters across gender and educational status, while Schumer only leads among self-identified moderates. Here's the poll it's referencing here. AOC gets 55, Schumer 36, 9% say they are not sure. So AOC in this poll already starts out above 50%, meaning she'd be very likely to win if this actually did end up happening. The polling also indicates that the race is relatively static and does not move when voters are given additional information about either candidate. In the survey, voters were shown two biographical statements about AOC and Schumer in a randomized order. For Cortez, voters were given a statement that includes information about her background, her unseating of an incumbent Democrat in 2018, and her support for progressive policies like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal. After reading the statement, 82% of New York Democratic voters say they have a favorable opinion of AOC, jumping from a 59% to a 69% point margin. And it reads the statement right here. I don't need to read the statement, but I mean, it's right here if you do want to read it, right here. The biography for Schumer includes details about his background, experience in the Senate, and support for mainstream Democratic priorities, such as lowering healthcare costs, standing up to Trump, and defending Social Security and Medicare. After reading this statement, 72% have a favorable view of Schumer, jumping from plus 26 to plus 47. Next, voters were once again asked whom they would vote to support in the 2028 primary held today. The race remains essentially unchanged after the statements. Cortez still gets 56%, Schumer gets 36%. Voters were also shown potential lines of attack against the two candidates. The first statement describes AOC as a polarizing figure who divides Democrats and pushes policies that are too extreme for the party. 14% of New York Democratic primary voters said this statement is very concerning. The second statement describes Schumer as a career politician who has cozied up to big corporations and voted with MAGA extremists instead of helping working people. 33% find this statement very concerning. Still, after reading these statements, the race remains the same, with AOC continuing to lead by 20 points, going from 55-36 up to 56-36, and after the negative, back to 55-35. So really not too much growth on that. The results indicate that Schumer has left himself vulnerable to a primary challenge in 2028, and that Ocasio-Cortez could be a strong candidate to defeat the incumbent New York Senator. New York Democrats and Democrats nationwide clearly want a leadership that fights harder to defeat Trump and the MAGA agenda. And again, the poll was conducted by Data for Progress between March 26th and 31st of a survey of 767 likely Democratic voters with a sample size margin of error of plus minus 4%. This is really fascinating. And the quickest comparison I can think of for this race between AOC and Chuck Schumer is what's going on actually in Texas right now, with John Cornyn potentially going up against Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas. Where that one is, Cornyn's the older incumbent senator. A lot of Republicans feel he's not loyal enough to President Trump, and a lot of Republicans in Texas want to primary Cornyn out to have a more pro-Trump senator in Texas. Where in this situation, Chuck Schumer is the older, long-term Democratic senator, except Democratic voters feel he's not doing enough to stop President Trump, and they want someone that is going to be more defiant and standing up to Trump and the MAGA agenda, and that, I think, separates AOC and Schumer in this one. As for what this means, we'll have to wait and see, obviously, if this happens, because AOC is on the short list of Democratic candidates for the 2028 Democratic primary, the presidential election. When you look at the early polling done so far for 2028, AOC is usually polling around second to third place. In the most recent YouGov poll, she has 8%. Morning Consult, she has 5%. Echelon Heights, 7%. So she starts out with a decently modest following for 2028, but maybe she decides not to run for president in 2028 and instead decides to go up against Chuck Schumer in 2028 for the Senate race. That could be potentially something that happens. And based on this polling data, it would show AOC starts out as a favorite against Chuck Schumer. And I think a lot of Republicans and moderates would probably underestimate AOC. And even some Democrats would probably underestimate her, but that's how she won the first time. She defeated a long-term Democratic incumbent who was probably in line to be Speaker of the House at some point. She was able to defeat him in the Democratic primary. And I think AOC versus Chuck Schumer, I would honestly probably have, if this poll, like this poll says, I would have AOC over Chuck Schumer to win that primary. AOC does a very good job at really motivating her supporters to get out and vote for her in a way that a lot of Democrats, like Chuck Schumer, establishment long-term Democrats, aren't able to do as well. So while AOC, a lot of her politics, maybe for some independents and Republicans, are definitely too much for a lot of Democrats, at least what this poll says, a lot of her policies are pretty much in lockstep with a lot of what Democrats are feeling. So AOC versus Chuck Schumer, it would certainly be a situation of the Democratic Party moving in a younger direction and away from a older, long-term establishment type of Democrat. But I think this is something that very well could happen. The only caveat here is that Chuck Schumer was just reelected in 2022. He won by about 14 points, so not a safe Democratic margin either, for that matter, but it was 2022, so Schumer will be up in 2028. So 2026 won't happen, and then 2028 will be after it. Chuck Schumer's name, maybe if he stands up to Trump more in the next 2 or 3 years, maybe it won't be as big of a deal of Schumer voting with Trump and the Republicans on the budget thing that happened a few weeks ago. Maybe that won't be as big of a deal a few years from now, but I think AOC versus Chuck Schumer would be a very entertaining matchup in New York, and it's something I think both people are probably taking very seriously, because while it may sound like sort of a pipe dream, it very well could end up being a real situation that happens in just a few years. As for Schumer versus AOC, who I personally think will win, like I said, I think AOC would actually defeat Chuck Schumer. I think AOC does a very good job at getting a lot of younger Democrats out to vote, and I think she would be able to win a primary against Chuck Schumer in that way. Will it happen? I'm not sure, but I'm certainly going to keep the situation monitored to see if this does end up happening, but I think it definitely could be something that ends up happening in a few years. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. Do you think this would happen? Do you think AOC versus Chuck Schumer would happen in 2028? Do you think AOC would win? Do you think Chuck Schumer would win? Or do you think AOC says, I'd rather run for president in 2028? Leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts. Really want to hear what you have to say about this. Also, make sure to give the video a like and click subscribe to post at least one new video every single day that you're not going to want to miss. That'll do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video.